Coming up on Chopper's Politics. Everything is a freedom of speech issue, fundamentally. Everything. The core principles of freedom of speech apply to, I can't think of a single thing they don't apply to, other than screaming fire in the theatre or perjury, etc.
Hello, I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is Chopper's Politics. An actor, a musician, and now a party leader? My guest today is Laurence Fox, a man who's made the not always graceful transition from box office to ballot paper. Feathers have certainly been ruffled along the way.
I can't help what I am. I was born like this. It's an immutable characteristic. So to call me a white privileged male is to be racist.
But that appearance on the BBC's Question Time programme was over a year ago. And I get the impression that Mr. Fox doesn't mind too much about feather ruffling. And his political career is moving forward. Last week, his movement became a party. The Reclaim Party was approved by the Electoral Commission, the UK electoral regulator, on Wednesday last week. So we sat down for his first interview since he was given the thumbs up. And I started by asking him, well, if it felt different to be running a party. Laurence Fox, welcome to Chopper's Politics.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
You have a party.
I do, at last.
This is extraordinary.
I know.
We're about 6 months after we first met, 5 months after we first met in the Red Lion pub, back when the government allowed us to do so. How does it feel?
It's a huge relief, if I'm honest, because, I thought it would be a very simple process to lob in a submission to the Electoral Commission. They check whether your party would be confused with any other party, and then they go, you're good to go. Apparently not.
Why do you think it took so long?
Well, I've my own views on why it took so long, but...
what are your views on why it took so long?
Part of me thinks that they possibly don't want us to exist, do they, really? But I noticed on the same day that Black Lives Matter didn't go through, which was a shame, because I would have enjoying the idea of freedom of speech conversations with that new party. But it must be a relief to the Labour Party that they weren't taking the knee to another political party.
That is interesting, isn't it, though, that Black Lives Matter, let's not discuss them on this podcast, but they are not a party, and you are a party. What makes you different, do you think?
What makes us different? Well, we as a political party, we can stand candidates and we have manifestos and we can get voted for.
We'll come on to all those details. Did you look at any other options on the road to becoming a party, like merging with a different party, possibly?
Yes, I did. I spoke to the Social Democratic Party, who I think are great in lots of ways, and we had lots of conversations. But at the same time, I think, I want to be slightly more of a... It's not political, but I'm not really a politician in these ways. So I'm more interested in applying principles to things than policy objectives. And I think I probably might have got into a bit of wading through syrup with joining in with another party. So I thought, let's go with what we've got. But I admire them.
Other parties tend to love committees, don't they, Laurence Fox? I guess you don't.
I love a committee. I do love a committee, but I'd quite like to know who's on it. Yes. And I think if you're joining someone else's party, then you probably wouldn't know who's on it. So my committee, I know who's on it.
We've had William Clouston, who's the leader of the SDP, on this podcast a few weeks ago, ahead of the anniversary of the Limehouse Declaration, which established the SDP back in the early 80s. He's got a great party, but that you'd have brought in some ready-made membership details and some engaged people, but instead you're going it alone without that head start.
Yes, I am. I think it's better. We're in modern politics, right? So there are places where we can converge, and there are things that we will agree on, and the same with reform. And, any other party, actually, who's, these insurgent parties. So I don't see why we can't work together. But I was worried that I'd end up sitting in a room full of people I didn't know, telling me what I was meant to think. And that doesn't seem the point.
Sounds a bit like acting to me, Laurence Fox, but we'll move on.
It's almost exactly the same, except acting has no consequences. And it's better paid.
Oh, well, it's certainly better paid than this, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Of course, you're not Reclaim, which might be an Essex salvage yard, are you, for example? You have to make clear you're not the same as that.
Exactly. We're not Reclaim, which is an Essex salvage yard. We're not Reclaim Project, which is a Manchester charity. We're not another Reclaim Project, which is a women's domestic abuse charity. But we are reclaiming. We're interested in reclaiming.
Do you worry about the rivalry from the Reform Party, this Nigel Farage thing, which is a bit similar, sounds a bit like Reclaim, but isn't?
No, not at all. I have a really good relationship with them, actually. Quite a very interesting relationship with them.
How interesting? Would you ever collaborate on things? Would you ever stand down candidates?
It'll be really interesting to see how interesting that relationship is, isn't it, Chris? It would be interesting to see in the coming months what happens in terms of that.
Already you're sounding like a politician. In the old days, you just answer whatever came into your head first and go for it. But now you're being held back by spin doctors.
My spin doctors, they spin me around all day long.
But on a serious note, the similarity in name and messaging won't worry you then?
Not at all, no. I think there's a gaping hole in politics, isn't there, and that hole needs to be filled. And I think that we are united, actually, in our stances on lots of things. So again, taking me back to what I said earlier, I think, we can collaborate with each other when there's time to do so, and sort of shift this two-party dualith, what does it, shift that around a bit.
As the 4 months it's taken to become a party, is that restored or brought into question your faith in British democracy?
It's ultimately restored my faith in democracy, because I think at the end of the day, you will have to, if you provide a valid and truthful enough case, then, the law usually comes out in your favour if you're patient enough. There were many times when I wanted to bang my head against a brick wall and say, but we've answered this question. But in the end, we got through, and that's fine. And I suppose that it's from either side, isn't it? You've got the Electoral Commission trying to make sure that everything is just okay, and that you've got me saying, well, what's the hold-up? But 'twas ever thus. We're entering a period of politics where, it can be tricky to get a bank account if you've got the wrong views.
And how much did this process cost you to become a party?
Well, ultimately, it ended up being a legal fees issue, and it was over 10,000 quid. But then my eldest brother's a politician. He has his own political party, and he didn't have any trouble getting through the Electoral Commission, so that only cost him his fee.
Who's that, your eldest brother?
Thomas Fox.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's his party called? Forgive me.
Constitutional Reform Party, I think. I don't know. I'm not. I don't follow closely.
I wasn't aware it ran in the family.
I know. I wasn't either.
Right. Now, your slogan is live strong and live free.
Absolutely.
It's a bit like Lance Armstrong. Does that worry you? Were you okay without that?
Well, Lance Armstrong is... Oh, God, what's Lance... Oh, I must speak to the marketing department. Well, no, that's just what comes out of my mind. I mean, you should live strong and live free. He was live strong, wasn't he? But he didn't live free because
yes,
he was
let's not go into what happened there.
Extra doses of freedom.
Yes, quite. So what's next then? It's in the weekend just gone. You've got some new polling out, which we can put into the show notes to this podcast. It's quite startling, I think, to say that nearly half of Britons are more afraid to speak their minds than they were 5 years ago.
Well, it is half of Britons are afraid to speak their minds. And I mean, obviously I suspected this, which is A, why I commissioned the polling, and B, why before I commissioned the polling, I decided that this was a really important issue. And we've got a real problem with our Prime Minister as well, who's sitting there going, it's okay to be woke, and you would look after your traditions and your things. And it's like, no, it's not. They stand in direct contravention to each other. So what you're doing here, Boris, is you're supporting it. And if you're saying there's nothing wrong with being woke, then you're supporting it. But there is a lot wrong with being woke. There's a lot wrong with people not being able to speak their minds freely. You cannot have the full and proper debate unless people are free to speak. So I have to say I was pretty startled that it's half of the population. But I also have to say that in another way, one part of me expected it, and I feel bad really that we've got a Prime Minister who was voted in, a Conservative Prime Minister who voted in, and he's said it's okay to be woke, but he's got no opinion on whether it's all right to chest feed or breastfeed. Yes,
that was a debate from last week, wasn't it, with the guidance in Brighton in one of the hospitals down there. We should say, of course, that it's a proper poll, isn't it? Savanta Comrade did it, 2,119 UK adults over 80 and weighted for the population. So it's a proper piece of work, isn't it?
It is a proper piece of work, and it's also supported and supplemented by some much deeper, not much deeper, but even more polling. We commissioned 3 sets of polling over this area and other areas, which over the coming months, we're going to start sharing with people. I mean, some of the findings are just really startling and so worrying. because it's having a real effect actually on people's lives. So you're stifling the debate amongst experts in the medical field over COVID and things like that. So people are not coming forward who've got a lot of expertise.
I'll just skim through some brief findings. Again, they'll be in the show notes to this podcast. 42% of Britons are afraid of speaking their minds on transgender rights, against 25% not afraid. On immigration, 43% are afraid to speak their mind, rather than 28% who weren't. 43% of people are afraid to speak their minds with the police. Again, 23% not. And so it goes on. 38% of people worried about speaking their mind in the office or the workplace, 24% against. There's a pattern here, isn't there, that people are just worried about saying what they think?
Absolutely. Because the woke, as I call them, these very morally superior people are so unconfident in their position, their authoritarian position, which they're slowly imposing as it's come out of American universities, the humanities in American universities, into English universities and institutions, and increasingly into corporate life in the UK. And just in the last 2 days, we've had the Disney actress has been ditched by Disney, and you've had the head of whoever, for saying that unconscious bias was an absolute pile of rubbish, which the government agree with. So these rabid, nation-hating Twitter mobs who come after people and try and end their careers, it's just so revealing that, A, they have no strength or confidence in their argument enough to be able to debate it with anybody, and that, B, that they would choose to decide that their way of solving this problem is to end people's careers. And we're the cradle of democracy, I thought, and I believe we're not. I believe if we don't take hold of this problem, it's an emerging and very, very serious problem. If we don't take hold of it and we don't have someone there politically standing saying we stand for freedom of speech, then it's Stasi time. What's next? You go into the National Health Service and you say the wrong word, you say breastfeeding instead of chest feeding. Do you get better treatment, worse treatment? Who knows? I don't like the way the language is going with it.
But it comes from the right place, though, doesn't it, Laurence Fox? These people who are pushing this woke agenda believe they're doing it for the right reasons, don't they?
It's a constant and committed drive to just silence anyone who doesn't possess a series of what are perceived as morally superior values. And I'm sorry, if you've got a country, 50% of that country don't feel like they're free to speak. 50% of us are frightened of saying there's a huge problem. And our Prime Minister's not doing anything about this. You voted for Boris. Everyone voted for Boris. He's going to get Brexit done. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Boris.
The point is that the government then is pursuing woke policies which are uncomfortable for half the country.
Yes, and the government are not only doing it, it's in direct contravention to what conservative values are all about. And, also you've got the Church of England, which I find even more baffling, has an anti-racism task force. So that's a critical social justice issue here. So you've got the Church of England now working essentially with another religion, which is the woke religion. It's everywhere. And, I know it's emerging and people find it difficult to see, and they find it, they can go, well, I don't like statues being torn down, and I don't like people taking the knee, and I don't like being told that I'm unconsciously racist. But if you put it all together, what you've got is an ideology and a religion almost that is a secular religion, which is taking over our culture.
It's not just the Tories maybe who have a problem here, it's Labour too, isn't it? Liberal Democrats.
The Liberal who?
The Liberal Democrats. Okay, that's a different debate altogether whether they're democratic or not. But what you are saying is that this issue is not being addressed by any party really, and that's the gap you found in the market.
Well, it's not a gap I found in the market. It's a gap. It's not even a market. It's our nation. It's the well-being of our nation. I'm interested in. Obviously I've had personal experience of it, so I was like, oh, this is interesting. I must see how it's happened. But as it escalates and gets worse and worse and worse, you're like, what is the best health of the nation? Well, how does one put the nation in its best health? One turns around and goes, we need to debate. We need to have it. You've got universities just spawning year after year of nation-hating ideologues who just want to rewrite history. And the polling is very clear on that as well. People do not want their history rewritten. This is a tolerant and loving country. That's what it is. And it aspires to be, and it's what it is, and it's what it wants to continue to be. And these people that walk around telling us that we're all massive racists all the time, we need a right to reply to them. That's what my belief is. I think it's in the interest of democracy that everyone speaks freely.
Thank you, Laurence. We're going to pause it there while we hear news from another brilliant Telegraph podcast.
Hello, former England hooker Brian Moore here. Well, the Six Nations is back, and so is my podcast, Brian Moore's Full Contact. Each week we will get the biggest and best names from the world of rugby to dive into every ruck, maul and TMO decision. You can't nab a front row seat this year, but with our podcast you don't need to. So just search for Brian Moore's Full Contact on your podcast app, hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss it.
Now, Laurence Fox, we discussed the polling you've done by Savannah Conrad on views on Wokery. But looking at the age breakdown, do you worry that you might be a bit of a pensioner party because the concerns you're expressing are those often held by over 55s?
I don't worry about being anything, really. And I think the over 55s are really important as well.
Well, my point is, it's more of a generational war as much as a cultural war.
Interestingly not, because my mates who've now got teenage children all look up at the miserable millennials and go, God, I don't want to be like that. So actually, we're probably developing quite a hardcore conservative, 16 to 17-year-old group, as opposed to this age group in the middle that feel that we've reached the apotheosis of mankind and we need to lecture everybody on how to live better.
What do you say to those who will say to you, this is UKIP light? What do you respond to that? Even it's annoying for you, I'm sure.
No, not at all. I'm really pleased with what UKIP did, and I'm extremely pleased with what the Brexit Party did, and I'm extremely pleased we're out of Europe. And as someone who voted Remain, I'm ashamed to have voted Remain based on the way that they've behaved in the last, as we watch how the European Union have tried to strangle our nation. And no, absolutely, not at all. Bring it on. When
did you become a Brexiteer? Just when the Northern Ireland Protocol became an issue?
I'm not fundamentally a Brexiteer, but I'm someone who's interested in free expression and fairness and common sense and good reason. And the way that the vaccine was handled by the European Union was pretty horrendous. And, I'm just like, I don't want to be bribed. That's not how you relate to your friends. You don't walk up to your friend and go, I love you, man, but only if you do X. It's not. It's been very unfriendly. And I think Britain has been made an example of to frighten other countries into possibly wanting to get out themselves.
Are you moving away then from just trying to wind up Twitter? For example, wearing a sign saying, I don't need to wear a mask because I've got an underlying medical condition, which prompted a Tory MP to have a go at you and all this kind of thing. Are you moving away from this lockdown skeptic idea into being a freedom of speech party? Is that what's happening?
Well, fundamentally, I'm about freedom of speech. And actually, I think in abstract ways. So my view on life was it should be easy to leave your house and not break the law. That's my view on life. So I thought, if you can order a thing saying I'm mask exempt off Amazon and walk around with it, are you breaking the law? Are you not breaking the law? I just thought it was an interesting cultural point to make that no one quite knows what the rules are. But obviously you get leapt on by people. But ultimately, everything is a freedom of speech issue fundamentally. Everything. The core principles of freedom of speech apply to I can't think of a single thing they don't apply to, other than screaming fire in the theatre or perjury, etc.
Wasn't that a bit offensive to those who are genuinely exempt? It undermined their right not to wear a mask because of their actual reasons not to wear one, as opposed to you're a healthy chap who could wear a mask if you wanted to but chose not to.
Wearing a mask causes me great anxiety. I feel extremely claustrophobic, so I'm sure I could have got a mask exemption if I wanted to. But my theories on masks is look how well they've worked. They seem to have done a great job, haven't they, in dampening down infections. I mean, I'm poor old sea turtles that'll be eating the 10 million of those floating around in the ocean for the next 15 years. I mean, I'm not pro-mask. I think it's not a good idea. But I'm also aware of the fact that COVID is real. But I also think we need to open up the country and we need to do it now. This Sunday would be good. Now that all the 70s have been vaccinated.
Sunday.
Yeah, now that all the over 70s have been vaccinated, open up the country. Thank you very much. That's what you promised. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, because a lot of the mortality is in those top 4 groups, right?
Yeah. And, people die of viruses and of other things. We've been actually, in many ways, we're very blessed that this is a virus of such low lethality.
We haven't yet seen in this country marches, have we, or demonstrations to open up the country in the same way we have seen in Germany and other parts of the continent.
And I can understand why, because people don't want to lose their lives and livelihoods, which they're already hanging by a thread anyway. So, and also I think if you organise a protest, you're going to attract the wrong people. You'll attract some people who will just want to cause trouble. And I don't think this debate, which is actually a very important debate, which has been, again, as a result of freedom of speech, has been ultimately silenced. You've got Sunitra Gupta silenced. You've got Cole Hennigan silenced. You've got these people silenced. And these are the top people in their field. So what you're doing essentially is the lack of freedom of speech is costing lives because people are not able to see the full perspective of the debate because the media will shut them down because the media are in cahoots with the government on this one.
So this research work you've done is the official birth of your party, isn't it? Along with the Electoral Commission approving your name. What's next? Have you got a slate of candidates to stand in the May elections?
What's next, Chris? I will let you know. But I can tell you that what I can tell you is that there is a series of things that it's not just this polling that I've commissioned. I've commissioned a whole load of stuff, and all of it is very, very interesting. And yes, who knows about the May elections? My Lord, it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it?
Will you stand yourself?
What in the May elections?
Can you vote for Laurence Fox?
Would I vote for myself?
No. Can listeners vote for Laurence Fox?
We just have to think about that.
You're turning into a politician. You're the different man that I first met in September.
Sorry, but it's been months
You're avoiding questions. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I'm not avoiding questions. I'm just trying to point us in the right direction.
Who's in your team? Who's around you?
My team is... How many strong is my team? My team has just grown, actually, by 4. Well, I'd need to ask their permissions before I release that information.
But you've got a team around you of people who know about campaigning and that kind of thing, have you? It's growing into a...
Yeah. Unfortunately, what's so great about this situation is the frustration that I have and am willing to stand for is shared, as we've just realised, by 50% of the population. So I've got 50% of the population to look at.
And how do you get candidates in front of them? How do you get your guys, your people's, your candidates' names onto the ballot papers for early May?
Well, you'll just have to wait and see on that one, Chris.
Will we see a manifesto, Laurence Fox?
Yeah, absolutely will. But as I said...
Before May?
As I said, you can't go into an election without a manifesto, can you? Even though most people just ignore them. Some manifestos are short, some are long. What I can say is that the things that I'm talking about are a set of core values and principles that you can apply to any situation. So I don't want to be a politician. I don't want to fill people's lives with politics. It's already in our relationships and our workplaces. People are terrified to say what they think at work. So I want to take the politics out of it and put the conversation back into it. That's my only mission.
Let's talk about you just before we wind up. A year ago, you were just literally in a media storm of your own creation after your Question Time appearance. How's it been? You haven't acted since then, have you? You were dropped by your agent, I think, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
And his work dried up, the work you're known for, which is acting. That stopped.
I got offered an acting job the other day to play Hunter Biden. I did.
You're joking.
No, I'm not. I'm debating whether I want to do it or not. But
you should do it.
Well, no, because ultimately at the moment I'm 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. I don't have any time. I'm going. This is not a great mathematician, Laurence Fox. He's not a genius mathematician. So it takes lots longer for me to understand. We're going to extremely detailed data. I have put out a lot of work so I can understand where the country stands on these things. So this poll is just one of many that we're doing, and I need to know what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, when you're in charge, when you're the boss, I've realised, whereas an actor, when you're a boss, you can just say, someone go and get me a bacon sandwich. But here, the buck stops with me, which is
yes, you get your own bacon sandwiches.
It's both thrilling, but also very time-consuming. So we'll have to see.
Was it a Hollywood film, this Hunter Biden vehicle?
No, just an independent movie. Who's going to make a Hollywood film about Hunter Biden? Jeepers.
I don't know.
What does Hollywood make films about nowadays? Hollywood's films aren't films anymore. They're just small little moral lectures about how you should be. I never see anything on the films that I wish I was in.
But Laurence Fox, you're an actor. You're used to reading lines for somebody else.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel you suffer from imposter syndrome? Or is this actually you? This is you. You've ripped off your actor's cape and here you stand.
And I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for you pesky kids.
Exactly, like a Scooby-Doo villain. Okay, yeah. But
do I sound any different to what I said on Question Time other than the fact that I'm probably a bit more measured? I mean, it's the way I think, it's the way I was raised, and it's the way that my relationships are with people, which is like, I have a good relationship with someone, feel free to be yourself in front of them. I actively avoid relationships where I have to sit there and go, yes, no, let's all take the knee before lunch. I'm just not like that.
No, and you think this issue of wokery, do you think it actually, is it a big thing? Is it a media invention? I know that on the internet is a big thing, but if you're away from the internet in the real world, people aren't on Twitter as much as we are. Is it as big a deal, do you think?
I have a feeling that what will happen, and actually this polling just reinforces that, is that it's an emerging problem. It's not totally, but I mean, it's emerging in our understanding, not emerging in its threat. The threat is absolutely and 100% real. And I think, your analogy with UKIP and Brexit and various things like this, culturally, this will be bigger and more divisive. And we can see it with all the debates that have happened in the last, over COVID, over Brexit, over everything. The social media has supercharged these debates as well. But in amongst the people, I've polled these people. They know there's a problem. They're aware of it. And I exist to give them a remedy out of it and a way out of it and give them some immunity to the virus of what wokery is in your mind. Because it is. It's a sense that you're superior and somehow there is an answer. And it's very anti-British. It's very nation-hating. And I stand in direct opposition to it, and I will do for the rest of my days.
Have we reached peak woke yet, Laurence Fox?
Absolutely nowhere near peak woke. You'll find peak woke will be loddling its way through for the next 2.5, 3 years, and it will, in much the same way as happened in America, I imagine it will become very, very, very powerful just before everyone goes to the ballot box.
Well, Laurence Fox, thank you for joining us this week on Choppers Politics, and we'll put a link to the research Laurence talks about there with his new party, Reclaim, into the show notes for this episode. But once again, thank you, Laurence, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher Hope.
Well, like him or loathe him, Laurence Fox could be onto something here. If half of Britons are worried about speaking out in public, perhaps his party, the Reclaim Party, may find a degree of support amongst the British electorate. Of course, you will have noticed that Laurence Fox certainly has changed a bit since we first interviewed him last September. Nowadays, he's got party spin doctors watching his every word. Let's see for how long he can stick to the script. If you've enjoyed this show, please remember that we can't make this podcast and others like them without your support and the backing of our brilliant Telegraph subscribers. If you're not one already, and frankly, why aren't you? Please do dip your toe in and go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where you can get your first month completely free of charge. And thank you to a listener called Careful Squid, who did just that and told us about it in their review on Apple Podcasts. We do read them, so do give us something to smile about and leave us 5 stars. Go on. If you want to get in touch, please do email us. The address is chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk or tweet us at chopperspodcast. And of course, thank you to my special guest this week, Laurence Fox. Thank you to my producers, Theo Luludis and Elliot Lampitt. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. And of course, if you can, a reminder, but please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. You won't regret it. Until next time though, cheerio!